Hello and welcome to the Wisden Cricket Weekly podcast. This episode is brought to you by our friends at Charles Tyrwhitt. Known and loved for their proper shirts, sharp tailoring and slick separates, they've added smart casual pieces, one of which I'm wearing now for our YouTube audience, and refined loungewear to their collection, designed to take you from formal to casual spaces throughout the day. For the month of June, we're offering our listeners 20% off at Charles Tyrwhitt by using the code WISDENPOD online or quoting the offer code in store. England have won a test match after 6 defeats and 3 draws in their last 9 test matches. England kickstart the Brendon, McCullum, Ben Stokes era with a victory, but not one without a few hiccups along the way. I'm Yas Rana, and with me this morning is the magazine editor of Wisden Cricket Monthly, Joe Harman, and pod debutant Tim Wigmore from The Telegraph. Great to have you on. Tim, we've got 2 episodes this week. On this one, we'll be focusing more on the Lord's Test match, whilst on Thursday, we'll spend more time covering all the other stuff that's happening in both the World and County games. Tim, what did you make, first of all, of Ben Stokes' first test as captain? Was there anything noticeably different about this England team on the field with the change of skipper?
Yeah, I mean, for me, almost the biggest was England's fielding was so much sharper, both the slip catching, the kind of energy, and sort of intent the field, and also the run outs. We saw three direct hits, which England have been very bad at, and obviously one of those from Ollie Pope led to the really crucial wicket of Holland de Grandhomme in the over that probably that turned the game. And I think the sort of attitude was actually quite noticeably different. It was much more kind of positive, much more let's go for everything. You even see with the Bairstow catch right at the start, and that was actually one that he could have left to Zach Crawley. Actually, you have both guys who were going for it, and yeah, occasionally that might create a problem, but you'd rather have both guys going for it than no one going for it, as we've actually sometimes seen in the past. So that was some positive signs. And actually, we talk about so much about England's batting and bowling and the improvements they need to make, but actually fielding is probably one that they can sort out in a quicker way. And actually, so from 2018 until this test match, England's slip catching, I think, was the 10th worst in the world. That's a really big issue, and some positive signs they're sorting that out. Even we see the slip cord and the catch were actually standing noticeably. They were tighter to each other. There wasn't such a big gap between keeper and first slip. So actually, kind of some technical changes and a kind of attitude intensity change as well.
And no holes in the slip cord and 3 catches in the slip straight away on day one. Joe, I thought the man management was quite noticeable. At the end of the test match, Stokes called Ben Foakes the best wicketkeeper in the world. So he's really bigging up players who are potentially either new to the team or fringe players at the moment. He gave Matt Parkinson every opportunity to get his first test wicket, allowing him to bowl at the tail, and used Potts like someone who's played 35 test matches who wasn't on debut.
Yeah, and that's reflective of Ben Stokes' personality in general, but I think that's also very much from the Brendon McCullum playbook. He would talk up his players to the extent that they started to believe they were players that they probably weren't originally with New Zealand. Lots of examples of players with modest first-class records who really stepped up under McCullum's leadership, and I think that's what you see coming through there. It's kind of, it sounds a bit pathetic, but it's kind of making players feel special. And these are prime sportsmen. They're obviously, they should be confident, and a lot of them are fairly ego-driven, but that doesn't mean they're not fragile like the rest of us as well. And I think perhaps we haven't necessarily seen that as being a bit of a nervousness. The flip side is obviously if you say those things and then it goes horribly wrong, you can look like a bit of a plonker. But they're willing to kind of stick their neck on the line and say these things and hope they come off. And, Foakes, I thought, halfway through that test, I thought Foakes is in trouble here. Listening to commentary on Sky, listening to commentary on TMS, the energy was very much, Foakes can't bat with this tail. The way he bats is not going to be conducive to the makeup of this side. Vaughan was even suggesting that Foakes should bat 5, even though he's keeping wicket and Bairstow comes in at 7. Harry Brook, we know, is banging down the door. So for Foakes to bat the way he did, particularly on Saturday, I thought he looked a little bit nervous. And fair enough, Root was going nicely, so he just let Root do it. But it felt like it was the Root show with Foakes clinging in there. On Sunday, I thought that was just a proper partnership between two really good players playing unbelievably well, and that should give Foakes a lot of confidence going forward, I think.
Don't want to get too excited by a 32 not out, but I think the points that Sky and TMS were making still stand. Foakes scored those runs with Root at the other end. On day 2, I arrived genuinely thinking that Stuart Broad was England's best bet of scoring some runs and getting a proper lead because of the way Foakes bats, and you thought Broad could score a quick 20 or 30. Tim, you suggested that Foakes could be like England's BJ Watling, and I was looking at BJ Watling's best innings in Test cricket, most of his hundreds. He's not batting with a tail in basically any of them. They're either hundreds with someone in the middle order or with a very good all-rounder at 7 or 8 behind him. So there still is that like dilemma about how to get the best out of Foakes with the current dynamic of the team.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the situation for him, it was a difficult situation second innings, but it was also perfect in that he could bat exactly as he does for Surrey when he bats at number 5. But the Watling thing, New Zealand, I mean, McCullum, I think at one point said he was his favourite cricketer. So that it does, which is interesting for Foakes because it shows to him that, all this talk of Butler or Bairstow keeping it and batting at 7, McCullum, that which fits in with the kind of the caricature of a McCullum team, but McCullum actually is not quite as simple as that. So Foakes' best chance of being a success for England and playing a lot of Test matches is to be himself, because his game is not to be a Bairstow or Butler. But the great difficulty will be England's tail is really looking as bad as it's been almost since 1999 at the moment, and that famous Test against New Zealand. So how Foakes finds a way to either to deal with, or if they can actually improve their tail. Foakes' style, it's a bit of a sense that Foakes has been a little bit out of time, just kind of unlucky in the Test team. If the team where you have 2 of, say, Chris Woakes, Sam Carrollton and Don Bess at number 8 and 9, that suits Foakes' approach very, very well. So I guess that the next step for him will be finding a way to bat with the tail and to manipulate the strike, which he didn't really even try to do. I think in the first innings, he took single off the second ball to expose Anders, that kind of thing. But
some of that's a confidence thing as well, though, right? Once you get into that role, I'm not sure he even felt comfortable like taking the strike because he was just getting the runs that he could. Whereas I think when he's filled that role for a few Test matches, he will be like, well, no, this is my role. I am actually going to make sure I protect this weak tail. And I also think there is an adaptability to Foakes' game that we haven't really seen. And again, I think that comes down to just familiarity of playing Test cricket. It's his first home Test. It's ridiculous. But in his first series in Sri Lanka, he played some aggressive shots. There was an innings of, I can't remember if it was a half century or 40 odd, where he came out, hit a couple of sixes. He has got that in his locker. It's just not his natural way to play, but I think he is more adaptable than perhaps we've given him credit for.
But it is a fascinating example because so often we've seen in England, Ollie Pope batting 3 is another example of this, where it's very, very challenging for players to bat higher up for England than they do for their counties. And Foakes actually at 7 is the first real example I can think of where it's actually probably harder for him to be batting lower down for England than higher up for his county.
Yeah, definitely. One thing that I think we'll just learn more about over the next few weeks and across the summer is how that McCullum-Stokes dynamic will work. At the end of play yesterday, Stokes said something quite interesting about how on the 3rd evening, McCullum was suggesting if we lose another wicket here when Foakes came in, that they'd promote Broad from 9 to 8 and hope that Broad would give it a swing, score 20, 30 quick runs, and that could make a big difference. Which is interesting in itself because Broad hasn't got any runs in the last year and a bit and has batted 8 only once in the last 4 years. But I thought the most interesting about that was actually that McCullum was making that call and Stokes said, Brendon was making that decision and we were going to do that. And that is not necessarily how coaches operate in international cricket. At least that's not what we've been used to with Chris Silverwood and Trevor Bayliss before that, I think. Certainly
with Silverwood and Bayliss, I think other coaches around the world would have more input. I think Justin Langer, for instance, would have probably had his say in that kind of decision making scenario. I mean, McCullum's got to make some decisions, otherwise there's not much point in having him there. Stokes made a couple of key ones before McCullum even got appointed, in that he said, "I'm batting 6 and Root's batting 4." After one Test, that's looking quite smart, but England aren't going to get far with a top 3 that can't make any runs. I mean, at 60 odd for 4. I gave them no chance, really, and it was Root's brilliance that got them over the line. We are used to Root doing it pretty much every time, but he can't do it every single time. So that is still a big question mark, I think. And it'll be interesting to see how long, if the top 3 continue to struggle, how long McCullum lets that play out. If he just says, Stokes, Root, you bat where you want to, or whether he decides to intervene. And that is going to be an interesting kind of power dynamic between those two.
We had a Great question from a listener who will remain nameless on day 2, I think, who basically said, should we just pack it all in and relegate England to associate status? This isn't going very well. Tim, Theo asks, what will McCullum have learnt about this England team that he didn't already know?
This is the kind of thing, for all the kind of positivity and sense of, England have stopped the rut and everything. They've ultimately had a test where they've been very indebted to Joe Root, Ben Stokes, James Anderson, Stuart Broad. Yeah. These are names we've heard before, and these are all names that actually played, of course, against McCullum in that famous Dorset in 2015, 7 years ago. And I suppose the concern is that the younger batsmen have yet to sort of get to the stage of taking on that mantle. Although the bowling from Matthew Potts was a genuine positive, and that was a really good sign for England. He did look like a good third seamer. The only thing about Potts, and we see this again in the end with England bowlers who are coming in, Sakib Mahmood is another example. You see guys who have basically bowled with a new ball for their counties because they're their best quick bowlers as you'd expect, and then they're taking on a different role for England. One of the things that I think is really important is getting players to replicate their roles more for England, and this applies to bowlers actually as much as batsmen. So could England actually get to the stage? I don't really think England are ever going to have a shortage of new ball bowlers in England. So could England actually be identifying a few bowlers that they could do the job at first and second change for England, actually trying to get them to do that job for their counties? It's a harder job, obviously, but it's actually one where they can probably add more value to the England team. It's interesting that Stokes said he was actually quite aware of that with Potts, and he was very conscious to try and get him into the attack early, which it obviously worked well, and this was a new ball wicket. But yeah, England probably need to ultimately move away from having an attack with basically four new ball bowlers, and I guess we saw the worst of that probably in Adelaide when we had Anderson, Broad, Chris Woakes and Craig Overton, all 4 bowlers who would always take the new ball in county cricket.
Joe, what did you make of Potts' debut? 4 for 13 in the first innings, with the best figures by an England debutant since Toby Rowland-Jones took 5 at the Oval 5 years ago.
I thought it was massively impressive. Yeah, that first morning was really interesting. I think we'd spoken on the pod before about having concerns that Anderson and Broad, it could all go quite wrong for them that first test, and that actually there was a huge amount of pressure on their shoulders given the fact they'd both been dropped and kicked up a fuss about it. But actually, very quickly it was like, oh yeah, of course this was going to happen. Of course, Anderson and Broad were going to take early wickets. But then you're like, what comes next? Is this where it falls away? Leach, obviously, by that point was already off. Poor old Leach, by the way. I mean, honestly, how much bad luck can one guy have? He was obviously off the field, concussed, and then you've got Stokes, who we didn't want him to bowl too many overs. So even at that stage with England massively on top, there was a lot of responsibility on Potts' shoulders to keep it going, and he was probably the pick of the bowlers. I thought overall he probably bowled better than Anderson, who went for a few when he came back for his second spell or third spell. And there's something about, he bowled brilliantly. He bowled attacking lines. In his post-match interview, he said, as a group, we talked about taking wickets, which sounds like a blindingly obvious thing to say. But obviously, what I think he means is they're bowling fuller, more attacking lengths, which you don't have to extrapolate too much from that to think back to what Anderson and Broad were bowling in Australia and the issues that Root had with them. So they were bowling full, and we know you've talked about this. Potts takes a lot of his wickets, bowled LBW, he bowls straight. And I thought he was an absolute breath of fresh air in every sense. I loved his interview at the end of the day with Sky as well. There's a bit of, not quite as kind of crazy, but there's a bit of Mark Wood in there as well. Just lovely personality, just happy to chat. And I think Durham have found us another one.
I thought he looked to really relish the occasion and really relish the challenge of playing Test cricket. Taking the wicket of Kane Williamson in your first over helps, and getting him out again as well also helps.
Balls, I think. Yeah.
And I think a lot of people who've not seen him bowl in county cricket, I think might have just looked at the speed gun and go, oh, another one who bowls low 80s. But I think he's quite different to a lot of the bowlers England have produced recently, in that he's not reliant on the ball swinging as such. A lot of it was seam nibbling it in both directions, and as you said, just bowling quite straight. I thought it was quite a lot like Scott Boland, actually. This kind of this guy with quite a strong frame who hits the pitch really hard, tries to extract everything that you can possibly get from the pitch, and just keeps it quite simple. If you just keep aiming at fourth stump, and if the ball moves in one direction or the other, you're going to take quite a few wickets.
And the thing he did really well and actually led to the wicket of Tom Blundell in the first innings, he changed his release point on the crease. And so the reason that Blundell gets out leaving in the first innings is because he thinks it's coming. He's been lining up for a ball release from a little bit close to the stumps, and then Potts goes a little bit wider and creates a new angle. And that's a really smart thing. You see, and that's similar to what you see with Pat Cummins. He does that, and that's a great thing if you can master, because you can create a new angle and it works anywhere. It will work in Pakistan or whatever, because you're not really relying on the pitch. You'll generate the angle yourself. There was a lot to like in Potts. I think it's static. Yeah, he's probably not as quick as England would ideally like and so on, but he's a very skillful bowler, and his line was good. And yeah, England, he clearly has his temper, and he relished the occasion. That was very obvious, and that's a really, really positive sign as well. So you can kind of add him to the list. I mean, I don't know where before this test, he's probably about England's 12th choice team.
Yeah.
But he's probably gone up a fair few places after that performance.
Yeah, it's an incredible rise. At the start of last summer, he wasn't even in the Durham squad, let alone team, for the first game of the season. But now you look at it, he's bowling well on debut, loads of guys out injured. Touch wood, he stays fit. He could get a decent run in the side here.
Well, touch wood, he stays fit is key. And England have got some decisions to make as this summer unfolds. The test matches, as always, come thick and fast. Not so long ago, we were saying that Anderson and Broad couldn't play in the same team, or they couldn't play two tests in a row. Well, now they're going to have to seemingly play every test match because no one else is fit. Potts, we know, has bowled a lot of overs for Durham already this year on some flat pitches, put 110% into it. We've got to be really careful not to break him as well. But then you can't. Obviously, I'm not suggesting he doesn't play next week. Obviously, he does. But then you have to think: does he play the next one? Or I guess it depends partly on who's coming back. I don't know what the situation with Woakes is. I don't know if there's an update on his fitness. And there's obviously Overton waiting in the wings. But there aren't fast bowlers who are fit who you're like, let's get him in. He's ready to go. I know Ollie Stone's playing again for Warwickshire this week, but
he won't play Test cricket this summer.
No, he's a long way from that. I mean, it would certainly be irresponsible to try and push him that far. But yeah, we'll just hope he stays fit and healthy. He has already had, from the interview you did with him previously, he's sort of, I don't know if this is encouraging, but he talked about he had injuries earlier, and now his body he thinks is much more ready for the rigours of bowling fast. So that is at least one encouraging step.
I'm aware we're very guilty of doing this on the show, that when Joe Root scores 100 in an England win, we just don't mention it because it's so routine. This really was really up there. England were 69 before, chasing 277 with this long tail. Ended up being in their top 15 chases of all time. They're second highest at Lords, only second by a couple of runs. It's his 26th Test 100, and he became the second Englishman to reach 10,000 Test runs at exactly the same age as Alistair Cook when he reached the milestone 6 years ago. 9 Test 100s in 18 months. That's the same number of hundreds that Jonathan Trott scored across the entirety of his career. The same number as Stephen Fleming scored over the entirety over his career. Rob asked, is this victory just going to paper over the cracks, i.e. the top order apart from Root still can't score any runs?
Yep.
Okay, next question.
It does. It's so glaringly obvious. It's barely worth talking about to an extent. It's just a continuation of the same problem, and that's why a lot of people still think he should be batting 3. Even that would still be papering over the cracks because you've still got to find someone who's going to bat 4. I mean, they've backed Pope and they need to give him some time in that role, but the jury's still very much out on whether he can do that role in the long term. I thought the Roots Test match was quite a moving thing, actually, and seeing he spoke afterwards, he felt quite emotional coming out, getting a really good reception on day one from the Lords crowd. And I thought he spoke really well on Sky afterwards about the last couple of years and how difficult it's been, and also the experience of giving up the Test captaincy. And even if you're not enjoying it, that is a hard thing to do. And it's obviously taken its toll, and he talked about the fact that he was starting to take it home with him as well, and that wasn't sustainable. And it was just so nice to be able to just watch him bat and know that even if it doesn't come off, he's not going to be the one in the firing line afterwards facing the questions. He's not going to be the one talking about the structure of the county championship or racism allegations or anything else or COVID, anything else, that is not his job anymore. Whether hopefully Ben Stokes can handle that kind of stuff, or hopefully he won't have to handle that kind of stuff. Root has been desperately unlucky in what he was faced with in his captaincy tenure. But Root can just bat, and hopefully he does it for years and years and years. And there's no reason why he shouldn't. He's clearly very fit, doesn't get injured very often. I could see 50 over cricket falling away in the not too distant future. T20 doesn't seem like it's happening for him, even though he's obviously keen to play more of it. So just let him bat and bat.
You're right to point out the love he got from the crowd when he reached 3 figures. It almost reminded me of the reaction to Cook's last 100, where it's like an almost awkwardly long standing ovation. Like, all right, let's get on with it now. He was so good after Stokes got out. I think it was something like 81 of 81 after Stokes' dismissal. He kind of went into like Joe Root ODI mode of strike rotation and all that. Tim, what's changed with Root in the last 18 months? I mean, he's always been brilliant, but at his first peak in 2014, 2015, he wasn't actually a relentless 100 maker. He just basically always got to 50. And he had a couple of years where things, by his standards, he struggled a little bit, 2019, 2020. But now it's 300s out of 3 times reaching 50 in 2020. And as I said, 900s in 18 months, which is just ridiculous.
Yeah, no, it is absurd. I think he seems to have found a way. I think to kind of maintain that intensity of his innings. I know he did a lot of fitness work in lockdown, which he's attributed to sort of helping his concentration, because if you're not finding the kind of physical aspect of batting long so hard, that actually makes the mental aspect easier as well. I think there was some technical tweaks against spin, obviously not so important in this test at all, which helped him during that amazing run in India and Sri Lanka at the start of last year. But I think he's just... And actually, he found a way to kind of compartmentalize the job of captaincy and batting, even when the captaincy bit was not going well at all. And so maybe now it's a sense of kind of it's a sit with the batting, and that actually makes it seem like wherever else is kind of finding playing Test cricket absolutely exhausting. For him, actually, he remembers it being a lot more tiring than it is now. So it feels like kind of comparatively easy. He's almost got a work-life balance now, which you don't normally say about being a cricketer.
Absolutely.
It's like Alistair Cook said something on the BBC, something about like how Root will go miles past his record, and Cook was saying, for him, when he was at 33, he found scoring test runs so difficult. So mental energy was spent on every run he scored. And he said with Root, he was very careful. He said, it's not easy for Root, but it is much easier than it was for him.
But he's got a lot more shots.
Yeah, that helps.
That makes it a lot easier.
I thought, watching him over the last 2 days, it was... I think so few batsmen have mastered batting in English conditions like Root has, with a slightly lower bounce, slower pace. The ease at which he rotates a strike, he is so confident with the 6 or 7 shots that he uses a lot, that he just looks so in control. And you can actually see, I think, why he also struggles a little bit in Australia, that some of the shots he's so reliant on here, when the ball bounces, are just more risky.
It glides outside.
Exactly. Joe, you touched on it earlier, but Jack Leach, so desperately unlucky with injury. He's not played a home test in nearly 3 years, and then his first one back to pick up a pretty nasty looking injury. And to be honest, touch wood, I was kind of glad it's only, in inverted commas, concussion, but got a feel for the bloke.
Yeah, I was in the press box at Lord's, and I wasn't watching the telly, and I didn't have an earphone in, so I was just watching and it was the far end from me, and I didn't know initially who the player was. I saw a player go down, thought that looks nasty, and I was like, who's that? It's just going to be Jack Leach, isn't it? And sure enough, it's Jack Leach, and it's just the latest chapter in a really sorry story for him. And you know, we've debated a lot on this podcast, as everyone has, whether Leach should be the spinner for England or not. But to an extent, that's not really the point. He's just not really had a chance to do himself justice over a long period of time. His record is perfectly reasonable, but I just really, really feel for him, and I don't know what they're going to do next test. I think he will have, in theory, he'll have seen through his concussion period.
So he's allowed to start training again on Thursday, so the day before the test match. So it'll be tight. It'll be tight. Yeah, it's one of those ones that, however, whichever call either you feel desperately sorry for Parkinson, who finally gets his chance and then is immediately dropped, or you feel sorry for Leach, who would have been dropped without even doing anything wrong.
I wonder when you look at that tail whether Leach, he might get picked for his batting, which is a slightly odd thing to say. But
Matt Parkinson hit arguably the shot of the Test match, that on drive down the ground. Obviously, a big moment, not just for Parkinson, but the podcast, Matt Parkinson making his Test debut. And in such bizarre circumstances as well. Like
getting the debut for Potts and Parkinson in one Test match.
It's a good week. Very good week. Yeah, I was a proud dad. But yeah, Tim, how did you feel Parkinson went on debut? Obviously, very strange circumstances, driving up late. It was almost a club cricket vibe to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then bowling on a pitch that wasn't offering much turn. People can debate a lot about various attributes about Parkinson, but we know he turns it, and he didn't actually get that much turn, particularly on day 2.
No, I mean, if you're going to pick a place to make your Test debut, I think he's been on 15 England. He's been on tour for 5 England tours and 15 England Test matches, and he would have picked probably a dozen of those to make his Test debut over the conditions he got at Lords, especially day 2 wicket at Lords. Yeah, really far from ideal. I think he
probably bowling at the wrong end as well.
Yeah, he's bowling at the wrong end, but the reason was actually England said the seamers were the main threat, which is maybe not ideal, but probably also not an unfair judgment given the way the Test panned out. It's one of those things. Obviously, people have seen a lot of clips of him on YouTube, but this is kind of real life. It's a bit more complicated than that. I think his speed, which is nothing new. I think it was notable. A lot of kind of ex-players watching. They are a bit worried that is he going to be a bit too slow for Test cricket? But again, this is probably not the right Test to judge that. I think he could do with a better googly as well, but I mean he's young. He's a 25-year-old leg spinner. This is a very, very difficult thing to master. I think you would have to say at the moment Adil Rashid, if he were available for Test cricket, would probably be a more complete option as a leg spinner. And we know that McCullum has sort of intimated he might be keen to try and get Rashid back into the fold. It's only for some matches, but I did think it was very good that Stokes brought Parkinson on to bowl at Tim Southee at the end, and obviously getting his first Test wicket. That was a nice aspect. And of course, England have really struggled often bowling at the tail. So there is a world where if Ben Stokes is able to bowl as he seems to be at the moment, you can have a leg spinner there predominantly to kind of target the tail and then come into the game more generally in the second innings.
I thought Stokes captained him well. I think it was a good thing to do from the team perspective, but it was a good thing to do from a kind of personal perspective with Parkinson as well. It's great. The reaction of the squad, the team when he took that wicket was really a really lovely moment as well. But I think it's always when you're weighing up a spinner's performance, I think it's always worth looking at the spinner on the other team. And in this case, Patel bowled 2 overs in the game, one of which went a long way to deciding the match when Stokes went after him. So Williamson's an astute skipper. He decided to bowl his spinner for 2 overs, and they bowled quite a lot of overs against England in the end. So this is not the pitch to judge Parkinson on, especially when he's only bowled 13 overs or so. The pace of his bowling is an argument that's going to carry on and carry on and carry on. But similar conversations were had around Adil Rashid as well when he was coming through. And the only way you learn if you're bowling the right pace for Test cricket is to actually bowl in it. I mean, there is an argument to say that you don't necessarily bowl exactly the same way in county cricket as you do in Test cricket. There are different demands. You're playing different qualities of players, different pitches. So if they think Parkinson's got enough natural talent, which it seems undeniable that he's got that, then he deserves the opportunity to figure out the rest of it whilst actually doing it. And Lords was not the pitch to do that, but I'm glad he got a taste of it. And hopefully we'll see him again this summer.
And also, he is only 25, and over a few years now has kind of shown he's the best young spinner that England have. And kind of regardless of what you think in the Leach versus Parkinson debate, Parkinson, all being well, should be playing a reasonably important part of England's plans, not just in Test cricket, to be honest, in all formats over the next few years. There aren't that many standout young spinners in white ball cricket. Parkinson is still probably the most exciting white ball young spinner. And in Test cricket, England go to Asia this year, and he is the number 2 spinner at the moment.
They're also very different spinners, and neither of them are kind of established Test bowlers clearly, but that should be something that is a positive for England. We don't have to say you're number 1, you're number 2. You look at the pitch, potentially you look at your batting order. There are loads of factors which mean we England should have 2 spinners to pick from. It shouldn't just be that's your spinner and he just bowls and bowls and bowls for everybody's going. So it would be nice if the two could kind of develop alongside each other, particularly, as you say, with the challenge of Pakistan around the corner. Although it seems they're quite keen to get Moeen Ali back for that one. But that's a different story.
Yeah, absolutely. Tim, did New Zealand get it wrong with the team picking Ajaz Patel, who only bowled those 2 overs when you had Neil Wagner, who's got hundreds of test wickets, sitting on the bench?
Yeah, New Zealand clearly made 2 big tactical errors in this game. The first was picking Patel, and the second, which was at least as big an error, was then not bowling him more than 2 overs. When on the third evening when Foakes and Root were together, there was and Foakes especially was looking like he was not very very proactive, so that could have been a chance for Patel to kind of get in the game, bowl a couple of maidens. And actually one of the big kind of subplots of the second innings was kind of the race for the second new ball can win there before, and actually Patel to Foakes could have been a good option to get some dot balls. But I think Kane Williamson clearly doesn't particularly trust him, in which case why did he pick him? And actually you talk about a kind of option on flat wickets, and this pitch did really change sort of as the ball got older. Actually a very good option, as we've seen time and again, is Neil Wagner, and obviously he wasn't picked. So given what happened, and through not a huge amount of Patel's own fault, I'd be pretty amazed if he was selected again at Trent Bridge. I think Wagner will probably come in, and there's also a case for Matt Henry. I mean, he's been player of the match in 2 of his last 3 test matches, including one in England last year at Edgbaston. And he's a useful batsman as well. He could possibly come in. I mean, Tim Southee actually, probably all the talk about Trent Boult, I actually thought Tim Southee looked probably notably more tired than Boult did.
The Kiwi teams looked very tired, didn't they, on Saturday evening? When that was when England really, they did it brilliantly on Sunday, but that was really when they won the game, that third evening. I did wonder why Darryl Mitchell didn't get more of a bowl as well.
Agreed, yeah.
I know, you don't expect him to take wickets. He's not necessarily a dangerous bowler, but you wouldn't have thought he'd go for too many runs either. I think Williamson uncharacteristically made a few missteps there, which I don't know, it cost them the game, but it certainly helped England win the game.
Weirdly, given that New Zealand lost the test match, do you think that the form of Blundell and Mitchell could be quite significant for the rest of the series? On paper, at 5 and 6, they're 2 of the least established people in that top 7, and them actually scoring runs, you kind of like, the first day collapse was an aberration, and if that doesn't happen, New Zealand probably win the test match very comfortably.
Yeah, I have to say, looking at that New Zealand side on the morning of day 1, Mitchell's not on test number 5, Blundell's not really a test number 6, to be honest. They're both probably at least a place too high. And then they batted absolutely brilliantly on the Friday afternoon. I mean, England barely had a chance for across pretty much 2 sessions. And at that point, it felt like not a new low. It wasn't quite that low. Another low. But yeah, no, I think that's an interesting dynamic now. That weakness now doesn't appear to be quite so. I mean, you look at Mitchell and Blundell's records, first class records, and there's not a suggestion that they would do this consistently. I know they both played kind of key knocks at different times, but the way they batted would suggest that they could absolutely do that again in the series. They weren't streaky innings and whatever. They were just very, very good test match knocks. So that will give New Zealand quite a lot of heart. And I don't think that New Zealand top order is going to be quite as flaky, certainly as they were on that first morning. And they'd had a shocker against the select 11 as well. There had been form, as in bad form, for what happened there. It shouldn't have come as a huge surprise, I guess.
Tim, you've got a new book out, Crickonomics, that you've co-authored. What is the book about? And we're going to show the cover to the YouTube audience.
Should I show it as well?
Go for it.
There we have it. So the book is Crickonomics, The Anatomy of Modern Cricket. It's out now, and it was co-authored with Stefan Szymański, who was also the author of Soccernomics. So it's a fairly similar vein to Soccernomics.
Greg Barclay, the chair of the ICC, this week gave an interesting and reasonably controversial interview, I guess, with TMS during the test match. He said that women's test cricket will not really be part of the landscape moving forward to any real extent. But he also basically warned fans that there's going to be less test cricket and there's going to be more white ball cricket in international cricket. And your book touches on how many chapters are there? 18 chapters.
20,
Look,
yeah.
how many?
There's 20.
There's
yeah,
20 chapters, and it
He
touches
hasn't
on
finished it yet.
and it touches on lots of different things around the economics of cricket, specifically looking over the last 20 or so years. But you talk a lot about why there are already fewer test matches happening. Barkley has given a warning to something that's already happening, as you explained that
Yeah, so one of the interesting things, people talk about, there's always kind of couched in these kind of warning terms, there will be fewer tests in the future. So we actually said, okay, what's actually happened? What's been the trend this century? And actually there's been quite a clear downward trend already in the amount of test cricket being played, which we actually weren't that aware of. And as interesting, so from 2001 to 2004, that was an average of 51 tests a year. In the last 4-year cycle before COVID, so 16 to 19, there was an average of 45 a year. These are two similar periods, really. They both have a World Cup, 50 over World Cup in them. So yeah, that's a kind of notable decrease. So that the total number has gone down by 23 over a 4-year period. So something is happening here, and clearly it's the trends that Barkley describing already well underway. So we see the proliferation of T20 leagues around the world, and we see huge, really, commercial pressures on Test cricket. And the best example of this is New Zealand. Obviously, they won the World Test Championship last year and had a very good era in Test cricket, probably back to 2013 or so. And they still only play 4 home Test matches a year. And the reason is they can't afford to pay more, basically. So in New Zealand, when they play a home Test match, they lose in the region of 400,000, 500,000 pounds sterling, which obviously for a board you can't really afford to keep on doing that more and more. So the model for Test cricket at the moment is outside of the big three, and in some cases really almost England matches when it's playing less attractive opponents. That Test cricket relies on being subsidised by the shorter formats, and that's the kind of model that's built into cricket. And basically, if we see more bilateral T20 leagues, that hurts Test cricket in 2 ways. The first is obviously the schedule. There's less gaps. There's fewer gaps in the schedule to schedule Test matches. The second is that if boards are actually not scheduling as much other cricket, so T20 and T20s and ODIs, that means they'll have actually less cash to then subsidise the home Test matches that they do pay.
So why do Test matches cost so much money for boards like New Zealand? Yeah,
it's a very fundamental but important question. It's really the staging cost. It's so if you look at New Zealand, well, if West Indies are coming, they have to pay for West Indies to fly kind of more than all the way around the world. Then the kind of requirements on hotels and things like that, and then internal travel, you then have to pay for things like the umpires, the cost of DRS and things like that, and then the sort of security around the ground and stuff.
The TV deals not claw back a significant portion of this, or
not really, sadly,
not anywhere near enough.
So these are net costs, I should say. So these are not. So this is after the money that they do claw back from TV. It's obviously with one of the reasons people a few years ago, it's not really now, we're talking about 4-day Test matches, is that with 5-day Test matches, obviously you have to pay everybody, the security staff and everybody for 5 days. You have to bank that to happen, even when it happens. That doesn't happen. So you can have so that the sunk costs are pretty high. And you're kind of left in this position where the product is pretty expensive to stage. And I would argue one of the big sort of failings of world cricket and the ICC has been the failure to develop a really coherent and simple broadcasting model, really a kind of Netflix for cricket. I mean, ICC TV has sort of tried to do this a little bit, but it's kind of picking up the cricket around the edges. But there should be a way, like in Major League Baseball, you can buy an MLB pass and kind of watch games on your phone and stuff. They're very, very simple, all out of market games, which is kind of non-home matches. So it should be in England that we're able to pay a subscription every month and we can watch Test cricket from all the way around the world. Often there's actually matches that people would want to watch and actually don't know how to watch. A great example of this was when Bangladesh beat Australia in 2017 for the first time. I'm sure lots of English fans would have loved to tune in for the end of that. And it was, I think as far as I know, it was impossible to find, or was it on some very obscure channel which was hidden away, and people didn't have a subscription. So there's things like that where the most basic marketing is you cater to people's demands, and actually at the moment Test cricket has lots of problems, but one of the simple things it's not doing right. It's not catering to people's demand. So there's untapped demand, which is not being catered for because cricket's administrators haven't been able to get this sort of system together. And then I suppose my dream utopian solution would be for which is never going to happen, sadly, would be for the ICC to run the World Test Championship as if it's an ICC event like the World Cup, and then to pull the TV rights, and then you can then be...
Big Three revenue will effectively subsidise other Test cricket.
Yeah, exactly. But also, if you talk to a broadcasters, if you're going to be like the Test cricket station, you want to kind of, it's actually better to do everything in a way. Like it's when so many of these Test series are sort of very much the 11th hour. Balls like Sri Lanka are very bad about this. And then TV companies haven't got the time to sort of to plan and to schedule and to do it right. And it's just kind of randomly popped on. They haven't got a chance to build a narrative around it. And then, I mean, the Test Championship is obviously very imperfect, but one of the big things it does do is it means that there's kind of skin in the games for fans of teams who aren't playing in a particular match. So you see, New Zealand at the end of the last Championship cycle, they needed results to go their way in order to get into the final themselves. So they actually cared about, say Australia South Africa actually, which in the end was cancelled, but that affected whether New Zealand got to the final. So that sort of thing is really good. We see that in Premier League football, whatever, where that gives fans a reason to watch those other matches. But I think the best way to do that would be this pooling of rights. Certainly, there was talk of pooling all overseas rights, which is a more coherent, like a more logical way of doing it. So you'd buy a package to basically watch all cricket not involving. Say in England, you could buy a package to watch all cricket not involving England. That sort of thing. And the second thing is to make the World Test Championship actually a proper league, and so you have everyone play the same number of matches. And again, that to happen, that needs subsidy from the pooling of rights. Otherwise, countries like New Zealand just can't afford to play more. But then if you have a league table where everyone's playing 12 matches over the cycle, and then you can literally just have 3 points for a win, 1 point for a draw in each game, and suddenly it's a very logical, and you can just explain it to your mate in the pub. And the moment it's just the percentage of points is a bit of a minefield.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I really liked about the book is how you're describing how the landscape of cricket has recently changed. It's almost like when you're within something and you're watching it every day, you don't notice something changes much, but here you do take a step back. And also I think potentially that in the UK we have a slightly warped view of the health of cricket because Test cricket is still quite popular here. People, I know there are a few empty seats at Lords, but compared to the rest of the world, it's still extremely popular. I mean, there's a line here about the influence of the IPL. The broad trajectory of cricket's journey is unmistakable. The question is how much space is left for the international game. I mean, it's you get into the financial realities behind a lot of decisions that are quite unpopular, like there being less Test cricket, but also like the 100, right? You explained that the ECB don't make as much money when Australia and India don't come. There are 2 summers out of 4 where that doesn't happen, and they want to have sustainable income that they can rely on each year. So that in itself is quite interesting and shows the direction of the way the game's going.
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen something similar in Pakistan as well. So when various countries, including England last year, have kind of gone back on their agreements to tour Pakistan, to people in the PCB, the Pakistan Cricket Board, this has been like evidence of why the Pakistan Super League is so important. It's like we need to be able to have cricket that we can rely on, so we're not at the whims of kind of flaky tourists. And this is actually this is one of the things that's sort of accelerating the rise of club cricket, is that the relations between many countries are not great. They can't really trust each other. Obviously, an extreme example is India don't play Pakistan, but even in much smaller examples like England not going to Pakistan and stuff, this is a reoccurring problem. And if you can't trust another country to make good on their obligations to you, then you need to find a way to generate money that's not dependent on them, which is why you have a situation of club cricket becoming more important. And so the idea of one of the central ideas of the 100 is the ECB want a product they can rely on year after year. So they then sort of Test cricket is a nice extra, but it's not the sort of beating heart of the product. And that's and that obviously puts Test cricket in a bit of a bind.
I want to ask you, Tim, because I know you love Test cricket. I know you also love T20 cricket. You wrote the book on T20 cricket. But having
You can have both, yeah. Yeah.
well, no, but more.
Let's avoid cricket's culture wars. Yeah.
But I guess more that now having done Crickonomics, how do you feel about the overall health of the game? Does it leave you depressed, or do you just look at it from a more kind of realist point of view? This is just the nature of what's happening.
So one of the really, really big positive things that so often we forget about is that if you're like a cricketer from outside the big 5 or 6 nations, there's actually kind of never been a better time, because you have a pathway to earn what you're worth. And we've seen Sandeep Lamachani play from Nepal, play in the IPL, which is unimaginable like a generation ago. So these sorts of things are really, really positive developments. I think there's a democratization of cricket that is underway and is caused by the rise of T20 leagues, which is brilliant. It's similar to what we're seeing in football, where it doesn't matter what country you're from. If you're good enough, you'll be able to play in Champions League or whatever. So that's a really, really positive development. There are obviously a lot of challenges along the way as well. I don't think like Test cricket has to die, but I think it needs good administration more than ever, and cricket doesn't have a huge amount of that. But I think, the game as a whole, there's a huge amount of the game as a whole, there's a huge amount of possibilities. I think it's actually great that there's 3 different formats, and you can love them all, or you can have your preferred one. That's fine. I think the landscape of cricket is, around the world, is more relevant and more popular really than it's ever been before. So as much as we can say, things were better, they probably really weren't.
Yeah.
The book touches on loads of stuff that we've not mentioned, won't have time to mention. Cricket's concussion crisis. There's stuff on why private schools in England are good at producing batsmen but not bowlers. How the Barmy Army are keeping Test cricket alive from their sofas. How Afghanistan is bringing cricket to Germany. Did the cold cost India a Test series victory in England? There's absolutely loads. So I would recommend any cricket fans to go and get it. Tim, where can people buy the book?
They can buy it in all good bookshops. So that's probably better.
That is the measure of a good bookshop.
Yeah, it is a measure of a good bookshop. Normally people give a plug to Amazon, but I don't think Amazon need plugs. So if you could buy your bookshop, that's even better.
This is your 3rd book, right?
Yeah.
And how old are you?
31. But they're all half, so it's 1.5.
Okay, fair enough. All right, well, that makes me feel a bit better about myself. Okay, good.
Well, awesome, Tim. Brilliant having you on. Joe, cheers for your time. This has been the Wisden Cricket Weekly podcast. We'll be back later in the week.